Hi everyone. Wow. So this is my first live on YouTube and I can see there's already a bunch of you here. I see Florin and let's see, who goes by Mega Frege, I guess. I'm not sure how you pronounce that, Florin. Oh, my cat was here, but she's just decided to leave. I guess she doesn't want to listen. And Rob and P, I don't know what your actual name is, P Maitra, I guess. And I know you guys have already got a couple of questions in here, and I think some more people are coming in as we get started. So let me know, where are you? Oh, and I see, Randall, Richard. So where are you all watching from today? I think I've mentioned before, I'm in the New Orleans area, which is why, as I've mentioned in some of the premieres, my cat's name is Nola. She's just exited the room. Randall says, please more hieroglyphics. Yes, I will keep doing hieroglyphics videos. Our hieroglyph videos, the reason I'm doing something a little different today is that actually we had a power outage yesterday. And so I lost pretty much the whole day in terms of what I could do on the computer. In addition, I've had a minor injury the past week, which has kind of slowed me down a little bit in general. That's put me a little behind. So I decided, well, I've been thinking about doing lives anyway, so might as well start now. So that's what I'm doing today. All right, I see Randall said in New Jersey, Rob's in Houston. P, you're in Alabama. Yes, that's not super far. Richard, oh wow, you're in Lake Charles. That's really not far. And Mohammed, you're in Sheffield in the UK. Hi, Uni. And is that how you pronounce it, by the way? I'm not sure because I don't know Finnish. You can let me know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, if it's Uni. And then I know Florin, yeah, you're in Romania. I'm not sure how to pronounce your city name. Is it Ploiesti? I'm just gonna take a stab at it there. We'll see. I'm not sure if that's correct or not. Malcolm's in Ohio. Andrew in Hayward, California. Wow. Thanks y'all for joining me. I know there's people from all over, and oftentimes with the premieres, there's people all over the place too. Even if there's only 15 people, they'll oftentimes be from 8 different countries at least, and stuff like that. Yeah, Randall. Yeah, it was a bit of a pain. Luckily, it was a temporary power outage, so we didn't have, and luckily it wasn't too hot. So that's much worse when that happens in July here, and we have no air conditioning for a while. Luckily, the weather's it was a little warm and sticky yesterday, but not like summer level. So we did okay with it. Oh, good. I'm glad I pronounced that correctly, Uni. Hi, M. Cantler. Welcome. So yeah, luckily power is back, and but yeah, yesterday I basically Ploiești is how it's pronounced, where Florin lives in Romania. But anyway, yeah, so I was basically able to check email yesterday on my phone and so forth, but wasn't really able to work on videos or anything like that. So that put me behind also on other work I had to do, like grading papers that my university students had turned in online, because I couldn't actually, my phone wasn't really adequate for accessing that and dealing with it. So, and then you're in Avon, Connecticut. Cool. I'm actually originally from New England. I'm from the Boston area originally, which you can't necessarily tell from my accent. Of course, a lot of times people have no idea, and they think that if you're from, people often think that if you're from New Orleans, you'll have a Southern accent, but that's actually really not true anyway. So it's not that people necessarily think I'm not from New Orleans because of that. Hi, Mark. Glad you could join us. Hi, Dawn. But yeah, people always have a hard time guessing where I'm from because of that too. All right. So I got a couple of questions before we started, and then on Facebook and such, and then a couple at the beginning here. So because I kind of did this live last minute, I have to admit I don't have a lot of materials prepared. And so talking about hieroglyphs is kind of hard to do unless you actually have, hieroglyphs on something that you can write, especially since my drawing is abysmal. You might not guess that because of my videos, but my videos are made with animation software. That is not me actually drawing. You wouldn't be able to tell what I was drawing if it was me drawing. Trust me on that one. Thank you, Florin. Yeah, I got this scarf at the British Museum when I was there a couple of summers ago, kind of kicking myself that I didn't get more Rosetta Stone things. This is the Rosetta Stone on a scarf. Thanks, Randall. I hate you. And I really wish now I was like, oh, I should have gotten the mug too. And they also have Peter Rabbit translated into Middle Egyptian there. I was like, yeah, I probably should have been a little less conservative on my purchases when I was there. But I was trying to keep down on the expenses as well as the number of things to fit in my suitcase. So I only got the scarf. It was my only souvenir that time. So anyway, I don't have a great way to display hieroglyphs for you today, but I did connect something kind of last minute right before we started, which is a program called JSesh, which some of you might be familiar with already. It's a wonderful piece of open source software that you can download for free. So if you don't have it, you can always go get it. I'll type the name of that in the chat window just so that you guys can see it, how it's spelled. And it's basically a hieroglyphic editor. You can type hieroglyphs with it. It's not as easy necessarily as just typing on your keyboard like you do with your native language, but you can come up with hieroglyphs. So I can show you guys some examples in there if I switch the view that I have here. So I know a couple of the questions on Facebook were pretty deep, like about verbs and things like that. I think that might be a little bit much to get into today. Hi, Jihad. Thanks for joining us. But I know Florin asked if the meaning of certain signs is generally accepted or if there are controversies about them. I was trying to think, there's certainly some that we've reevaluated in the past few decades, and our interpretation has changed. Not a lot of them, though, but I'm trying to think of, and not necessarily their meaning or how we translated them, but oftentimes we have learned more about the sounds of Egyptian, and so we've realized that the sounds were actually a little bit different than what we'd thought before. And actually, a good example of that is the word sesh, so which is used in JSesh. Let me pull it up on here so you guys can see. And I'll show you. So sesh, which is what you'll usually hear people say a lot of times for this hieroglyph, is a hieroglyph that is for writing or a scribe. It's a picture of a scribal palette and a reed brush. So let me change my view to that so you guys can see it. There we go. So this scribal palette, we've traditionally basically pronounced it like sesh. Of course, as I've said before, in Egyptian, we don't know the vowels for the most part. So that short E sound in the middle, I am just inserting for convenience. But the S and the sh sound, that SH or shin sound, are ones that we're familiar with from Egyptian. And I actually, when I went to graduate school, we still were saying sesh all the time, and it's still pretty common. You'll read it in publications. But we've realized in the last couple of decades that sesh is how those sounds are what they had in the later, I'll try and make it larger on here. Let me cut off part of it so that you can just see the hieroglyph larger. It's only going to be a little pixelated when I make it bigger, but let's see. Anyway, you'll see me messing with it live here. What we've realized actually is that sesh is the sounds that were used later on in Egyptian. So that's where we got it from. I can't remember when it starts being sesh, maybe in Demotic, maybe a little earlier. But originally it was actually sech. So like an S and then more of a guttural H, a soft guttural H after it. So stuff like that has changed in our interpretations. We still know that it means the same thing in terms of it's a word for writing or scribe. Is that better in terms of the size? You guys let me know. So, because it's hard to, it's so far off of my projecting screen now, the window that I've expanded into it, that it's like I can't even get a hold of the handles anymore to do it. But I could mess with it a little bit more if you'd like. Let's see, I can move it over and do that again, and so forth. But let me know if the size of it's still an issue. Celtic Tiger, yes, this is live. This is my first live, actually. I have to say, maybe you might have guessed by the fact that all my videos are animated and I'm not in them. I am not a fan of being on camera, so this is kind of an unusual thing for me. So I'm trying to think, Florin, if there were any other examples for what you'd asked about whether the meanings for the signs had changed in our interpretation, or if there are controversies. I think that the controversies tend to be on more of the grammatical details. We still have some controversies over some verb forms, for example, not so much about the general meaning of the words, which sometimes we refine the nuance of it, but for the most part, it has to do with like, okay, so is this verb form, the way that this is written, does this mean that this is some kind of emphatic verb that emphasizes a particular part of the sentence? Or does this mean that this is just a simple perspective, like in the future kind of verb? That we have some debates about that kind of stuff. The more detailed kinds of things, but not so much usually about the signs. It's possible I could be forgetting one that's sort of debated, but generally speaking, that's how it is. Another example in terms of sounds change is the sign for seal, which used to be interpreted as, I think it was sejuti or something like that, and now we understand it to be khatemti, which khatem really for a seal. Khatemti is like somebody who seals things. So that's a pretty different set of sounds, and I actually am not sure what the background is with that in terms of why it was believed to be the old one, but a well-known Russian scholar, Oleg Barlov, figured out a few decades back that we had the sounds wrong, and it was actually khatem, which interestingly is very much actually like the Arabic word for like a signet ring or seal kind of thing. I don't know if that's just in Egyptian Arabic or if it's in other dialects of Arabic as well. Let's see. Yeah, and P, I know you've asked questions about how hieroglyphs morphed into Demotic and then Coptic as well. I have to say that is not my specialty, so I would have to look into it a little bit to be sure about the details of it, but I do know that Demotic doesn't really come out of hieroglyphs. There's another script that we call hieratic, which was used earlier on in history before Demotic as the regular cursive form for like everyday kinds of writings. So for everyday things, like if you were writing a letter to somebody, you would not write that in hieroglyphs. Partially just because, as you can imagine, that would be very time consuming, right? Because even if you're drawing pretty simplified hieroglyphs with a reed brush or something like that, it's still going to take you a pretty long time to be drawing birds and hands and various other signs. So they very early on, already in the Old Kingdom, come up with what we call hieratic, which is basically a cursive form of the writing, and that does come out of hieroglyphs. Early hieratic looks very much like the sorry. One of my relatives just sent me a text saying, "Oh, you're live." It distracted me there for a moment. Now I forgot what I was saying. Oh, yeah. So we already have hieratic in the Old Kingdom. It looks actually very much like hieroglyphs at that time, like more like cursive hieroglyphs. You can still identify the signs pretty easily. As time goes on, the hieratic tends to look less and less like the original hieroglyphs. And because it's what people were using for everyday writing, really the most writing, much more than hieroglyphs, it kind of morphs into its own thing over time. And you don't have exact equivalence between what people are writing in hieroglyphs, say on stone monuments, and what people are writing in hieratic. I mean, the vocabulary is still the same and so forth, but in hieratic, a lot of times they're, in the New Kingdom and later, they're adding, for example, more determinatives on the ends of words that we didn't have before and don't tend to show up in the hieroglyphs so much. And then eventually there's a form of hieratic later on that's called abnormal hieratic. And if there happen to be any dematicists out there who are watching, you can correct me if this is wrong. But my understanding is that when you get into the late period, that abnormal hieratic has some relationship with the beginning of demotic. And so, but I don't know the intricacies of that because it's about 1,000 to 1,500 years later than my specialization. So I'm not as well versed in things that are, say, like the second half of the first millennium BC, which that is. It's certainly something I could easily look into, though, and so maybe that would be a good future video topic. I'll think about doing that one, Rob. Or sorry, that was P who asked that. All right, now I've kind of lost track of the chat. Let's see what else people are saying. Andrew asked, what school or program would I recommend for self-learning? I have degrees already. I just want to sit in on the smartest classes. So, Andrew, are you looking specifically for hieroglyphs or for Egyptology in general, different topics, things like that? And let me know in the comments, and I'll scroll down and look at that in a moment. And Randall had asked about the Sesh hieroglyph. That I missed that earlier, about if it's a what the picture is. Yes, it's a picture of the palette with the two colors of ink and a reed brush for actually doing the writing or decorating. So the standard thing was they used black and red ink, black mostly, but they used red for certain annotations, titles of works, sometimes for things that were negative and things like that. Let's see. All right, what else are they doing? George, welcome. Thank you. Glad to hear you love the videos. Andrew, you're an animator for the same reason. Yeah, you want to be behind the scenes. I totally can relate to that. This is the first time I'm doing a live, and I have to say it's not the most comfortable thing for me to do. Jihad asking about whether scribe and writing are always together. Yeah, they're from the same root. So you can write both words with this sign, the scribal palette sign. So technically, if you were talking about a scribe, somebody basically meaning somebody who writes, that's what it means. But in English, we translate it as scribe. Technically, they would generally have a seated man determinative after that because you're talking about a person. But oftentimes they leave those things out too. So sometimes they write it just like this, which would also be the same way that you would could write writing. For writing, they also might use a determinative of a rolled up piece of papyrus with a seal on it. So you got that. Let's see. CRD 1993, do you offer tutoring in hieroglyphs? Have you studied hieroglyphs in school? I'm working on a PhD minor in Egyptology and hieroglyphs. CRD, yes, I have a PhD in Egyptology. In case anybody cares, I went to the University of Pennsylvania, and which is one of the older programs in Egyptology in the States. And I do offer some teaching in hieroglyphs for anybody who's interested. So I have in the past offered what I call a group program, which is basically what you could think of as kind of a high-touch program. That is, I keep it small, and we have live calls with only 2 to 4 students in them with me. I'm still doing that for my more advanced students, but I've stopped doing it for beginners. And what I am going to do in the near future, probably in about a month, so keep your eyes peeled, is I have a new course for beginners that's coming out as well. So if y'all are interested in that, I do suggest you join my email list if you're not already on there. So if you go to, I'm trying to remember what the URL is for this. It's Voices of Ancient Egypt, as you might expect, since that's the name of my channel, voicesofancientegypt.com/guide. I'll put that in the chat. And if you go there, it's the page will tell you it's for getting my half-hour hieroglyphs guide, which gets you started with hieroglyphs. And it really is a good starting point. It's the same things I teach my beginner students at the very beginning. But when you get the guide, you'll also join my email list as part of that. So once you're on my email list, you'll be one of the first people to hear about it. So if you're interested in that, you can look into that. And let me see if Andrew. So ancient language, you're specifically interested in, Andrew. So As I mentioned, I do teach that. I also teach at a university. I mean, so if anybody wants to go to university to learn it, they could. But the number of places where you can take Egyptian in North America is fairly limited. There are a number of institutions that have Egyptologists at them, like me, where I'm the only Egyptologist in this region, as far as I know, for states around. Basically, it's possible there could be somebody who works on Egypt some who I don't know, who maybe is in Arkansas or something like that, or Mississippi. I don't know, but as far as I know, I think I'm the only one in this region. So at my university, we don't have a large Egyptology program because I'm the only one. But I do offer Egyptology courses. So there are a number of places like that if you want to go the university route. If you want to self-study, I think Andrew was talking about, then there are a few different ways you could go. As far as books for the language go, I really like Collier and Manley's book, which I have here. Let me see if I can pull it out so I can show it to you guys. One of the advantages to I have bookshelves under my desk, so I can just reach things when I'm talking about it. So I really like this one, which is How to Read Egyptian Hieroglyphs by Mark Collier and Bill Manley. And I think it's one of the better intro books because it is a little bit more detailed than, say, a lot of the intro books that you'll find in a museum gift shop or somewhere like that. It goes a little deeper. But at the same time, it's a lot more accessible and easy to use than the typical Egyptian grammars that are used in university courses, which, quite frankly, I mean, unless you have a lot of linguistics background or or a lot of language learning background and you're very good at that, they can be very challenging books to use. So I like this one because it's kind of in between. It's also, depending on... Some people find that one a little heavy already, even especially if they're working totally on their own and not part of the class. So there's also by Bill Manley as well, this one, the Egyptian Hieroglyphs for Complete Beginners. And this one is sort of a little bit of a scaled back version of the other. It's a more recent one. Some people really love this one, I know, as an introduction. I don't use it in any of my courses because it just doesn't go deep enough for the things that I teach usually, but it is a very well put together one with good illustrations of the hieroglyphs and text to practice on and so forth. So if you're looking for books, those would be my suggestions. As far as other ways, I'm trying to think what else there might be. There are certainly some of the Egyptology interest groups around in the States and particularly in Europe and in the UK especially, I'm thinking about. Oftentimes we'll have like study days or brief courses and things like that they'll put out that are not part of a university, so it's not for credit or part of a degree program or anything like that. But they'll offer these short courses just for people who are interested. So that's one option. That's not really technically self-study, but it's something that can kind of help you along. And if you find it useful, I have a practice book that I sell on Amazon. Amazon's been kind of weird with their printing lately, though. So sometimes you can get it and sometimes you can't. I assume because they're having, staffing issues, which is totally understandable right now with COVID-19 stuff. So sometimes they're printing books and sometimes they're not. I can give you guys the link for that if you're interested. But it's not an instructional book. It's just a book with templates in it basically for practicing. So it's the kind of thing that you might use alongside a book like this one so that you can write your exercises in it. So one sides of the page have graph paper, because if you're at all like me, it's hard to draw the hieroglyphs. And I find if I have a grid, it makes it much easier. And then on the facing page, there's regular old lined paper so you can write out your transliteration and translation. Those are the resources I can think of off the top of my head for that. So let's see. I'm a little behind on the chat now. Let me see if I can catch up on what people are asking. CRD is asking about, do you know any other groups of Egyptologists that I could meet up with in the field and compare research with them? So One of the main places, if you're looking for professional Egyptologists, I don't know if you're looking in where you are, if you're in the States, or I think you said at some point, didn't you say, are you at the University of Memphis? Is that right? Okay. So, I mean, you probably already know then if you're at the University of Memphis, which is one of the few places in North America that has an Egyptology program, that they have, we have national organizations that are basically both for professionals in the field as well as for people who are just interested. So the American Research Center in Egypt, which we call ARCE for short, is the main one here in the United States. There are a number of them in other places. So in the UK, for example, the Egypt Exploration Society is the main sort of national one, but there's a whole bunch of little regional clubs and things like that too. So ARCE, for example, actually we had to cancel, of course, our national conference that usually happens in early April because we can't meet in person right now, but they're doing their conference online. So they spread it over 2 weekends. We just had a bunch of papers presented on Friday and Saturday this past weekend, and they're doing it some more this coming Friday and Saturday. So if y'all are interested, you can, it's free. It's totally free to sign up. Now I will put in the link for ARCE here. It's arce.org. They, just a warning that the papers are by scholars and intended for scholars, so they can be pretty complex, and they're not really meant for an introductory audience or anything like that. So for any of you who are interested but don't have a background, some of the papers might be very understandable and others might sound like somebody speaking a foreign language to you. It just depends on what it is. Yeah, University of Memphis, CRD is saying, is a good program. It is. Let's see. So Andrew just wanted to know where it could snag a class. Hopefully I answered that one. Oh, P, so you actually were wondering about hieratic. Yeah, so if you look at, so going back to that topic again for a minute, if you look at early hieratic, for example, like our earliest papyrus, or papyri, I should say, because it's multiple documents come from the site of Wadi al-Jarf, which I don't know if you all have heard about. They were just discovered about 6 years ago now, I believe. I think it was 2014, at a port site on the Red Sea. And you can see from those that, you know, they're writing in what almost looks more like cursive hieroglyphs. It's not like a totally separate script like hieratic becomes. And just over time, it really becomes its own thing, because the scribes that's what they're really writing in most of the time. A lot of times people don't realize it, but not only was literacy very low in ancient Egypt, we don't really know exactly, but we estimate, you know, probably only like 1 or 2% of the population could read and write. And even amongst those, most of those probably were reading and writing hieratic, not hieroglyphs. So they might have known some hieroglyphs, but they wouldn't have been as fluent in that probably as in hieratic, because most of your everyday things are written in hieratic. Letters, contracts, royal decrees, receipts, all kinds of things like that would have been done in hieratic. Oh, hi, Sakina and Dakota. I'm glad you're able to join us today. I think I actually have some of the a publication of the Wadi al-Jarf papyri here handy, so I could show you a little bit of it. If I can pull up a plate. That's one convenient thing about having a pile of stuff behind me that I haven't fully put away, is I have this book from the library that I have. Let's see, I'm gonna find a good picture in here. So like, here's some of the fragments, for example. And there's the photograph of the papyrus, and then they show you a drawing that they did as a sort of transcription into hieroglyphs. So it gives you an idea of how similar they are there. They don't really look that different between how they're writing things on papyrus in a more of a script form there compared to full hieroglyphs. So hopefully you can see that pretty well. All right. Sakina was asking about the book. Yeah, it's on Amazon. I could get you all the link because it's not under Voices of Ancient Egypt. I actually I put the author as Egyptophile Publishers, so you can probably find it by searching that. But I also should have a link here. Now, it's sold in various countries, so it depends on where you are. I'll give you the link for the US, but it's also sold by Amazon in the UK, in Germany, in France, in Spain, Italy, Japan, and Canada. So, depending on where you are, you might want to try whatever the closest Amazon site is to where you are. I'm not sure if that would work for you, Sakina, or not, but that's it. Okay, Dakota saying, what about her question? I haven't seen it yet. Let me go looking. Let's see. And Cantler said that's really interesting, useful. Glad to hear it. Okay. P is asking me to keep doing this when I'm more comfortable. I think I will start doing lives more regularly. Just have to figure out how I'm going to fit that into the schedule. Let's see. Dakota wants to know about phonetic complements. Yeah, I could talk about that a little bit. Let me just scroll through the chat here a little bit briefly to see if there's anything else that's sort of quicker to answer first. Carlos, welcome. Thank you. That's great. I always love to hear that people find my videos useful. Florin asking how many determinatives there are. Geez, I don't know, hundreds. So I couldn't tell you exactly off the top of my head. And a fair number of signs can be both phonetic or a determinative. So we could count them twice. But there are many, there's about 1,000 or so hieroglyphs when we're talking about Middle Egyptian, which is our classical stage of the language. But only probably about 300 that are used very regularly. So a really big portion of those are determinatives, either exclusively or as part of their role. Carlos said he just started learning hieroglyphs seriously, and he says the videos were like destiny. Well, good, I'm glad. Let's see. Malcolm wants to know how much you should study each day if you're going to study each day. If you can study every day, that's wonderful, even if it's only for a short time. I tell my students this all the time, that the frequency of studying is actually more important than the length of time each time. So even if you study only 15 minutes a day, if you do that every day, as opposed to say doing 1 hour one day and 45 minutes another day, that'll actually be more effective. So, I mean, the more you study, the more effective it is. But I would say if you can study daily, even if it's only for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 if you can, I mean, that would be great. Then you're going to make progress because that repetition really, really counts. So Randall had to go. I'm sorry I missed saying bye at that time. Let's see. Oh, Sakina said, how are you? I'm doing pretty well, Sakina. Thank you. I hope you're well. Let's see. P just figured out who I am. Yep, that's me. M. Cantler, you're in the UK. So yeah, the UK actually has a lot of smaller local groups, and they often put on good programming with Egyptologists speaking, sometimes like study days or even mini courses and things like that. So I would look into whatever's in your area, or maybe even other areas of the UK too, since it's not an enormous area, so you might be able to travel to another part of the country if there was something you really wanted to go to. And right now, almost all that stuff's online. So for the time being, at least, you can access a lot of it online. And the EES, that's the Egypt Exploration Society that I mentioned before, they're doing a series of online lectures over the next couple of months. And also, RC is going to be doing that too. That's the American organization I was talking about before, the American Research Center in Egypt. That's ARCE. They're also putting together a lecture schedule. They don't have it up on their website yet, but I think that they will probably in the next week or two. I'm actually going to be doing a talk as part of their series. They asked me to do one. So you can check them out. And if you join their email list, I'm sure you'll hear about it from there. Let's see. And Andrew, you already have both those books. Great. And Celtic Tiger also says he has that. And Uni also. John says, please try your best to be comfortable because he enjoys the videos. Well, thank you. Yes, I know. It's just, luckily today I think I've managed to kind of ignore the fact that I'm on camera. And so it's going all right. If I had to look at a big image of myself, I think it would be a little bit harder. So Andrew's also interested in the cross communication between Assyrian cultures and Egyptian and Ethiopic. Yeah, that's a really interesting topic. There's certainly a lot of material from the New Kingdom and later of correspondence between Egypt and some of the different Mesopotamian and the Hittites and so forth also. Let's see. P, yeah, thanks. I actually haven't updated my publications online in a while, P, so that's probably a little bit outdated. I've been negligent in that. I don't know when the last time was I updated that. Let's see. Is there a way to type hieroglyphs on my Android phone? George asks. Yes, there are hieroglyphic keyboards. I actually have an iPhone, so I don't know specifically about Android ones, but I imagine if you search for an app, you'll find one. Usually you have to install an app and then it puts like a something into your keyboard. At least that's how it works on the iPhone. And then it doesn't have every single hieroglyph, but a lot of them. So you end up scrolling through a lot trying to find the hieroglyph that you want because obviously there's way more than there are spots on a keyboard. Oh no, M. Cantler lost its connection, his or her connection when I was talking about it. I'm not sure which book it is now because I got behind on the chat. Sorry. If you can tell me, M. Cantler, was I talking about the Wadi al-Jarrah papyri or was I still talking about instructional books for Egyptian at that point? I'm not sure. Do you say prayers in Egyptian hieroglyphs? Malcolm asks, I'm not sure if you mean me personally or if there are prayers in Egyptian hieroglyphs. I don't personally do that. I know there are some people who do. There are different types of prayers in Egyptian, some of which are things that are pretty different from what we think of as prayers, like asking people to bring offerings and things like that. Some of them are, so they're also kind of, maybe not prayers so much as, but like hymns for different deities or for the king and so forth. So there are things like that. Jihad just purchased my book. Oh, thank you. I hope that it actually ships soon because I actually got some for my students a little while ago, and I just ordered them for two of my students here in the States, and then a day later I went to order the one for my student in the UK, and they weren't shipping for 2 months. And I was like, whoa, what happened? So they all of a sudden shut down their printing. So, but then I've noticed a few books have gone out recently, so maybe they've got things started back up again. Andrew said, thank you. You're a gold mine. Well, I'm glad it's helpful, Andrew. Thank you. Good book for beginners. Uni says is The Complete Middle Egyptian by Richard Bussman. That is a good book. Uni, I like it. I like the examples in it and so forth. I'm glad to see that you find it's a good book for beginners. I was a little hesitant to recommend it to beginners because I thought it might still be a little too heavy. But it is definitely not as hard to understand as your standard Middle Egyptian grammars that you usually get in university courses. So it is a good kind of in-between book as well. And Uni has the title and the author, Richard Bussman, there in his comments up above. So you guys can scroll up a little bit to see it if you need to. And let's see, so many questions. Celtic Tiger asked what sparked my interest in the field. That's kind of a long story, but I'll try to keep it as short as I can. Basically, when I was a child, going to museums. I grew up in the Boston area, so the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston is the one that sparked my interest. The earliest I really remember very clearly is when I went to a traveling exhibit. Actually, it was actually at the Museum of Science rather than at the MFA, but I had already been to the MFA many times. And at the Museum of Science, they had an exhibit on Ramses. It was called Ramses the Great, about Ramses II. And I think it was probably just because I was at the right age. That's the one that I remember. I still have the catalog from it. It's in another room. Otherwise, I'd pull it out for you and show you, because it's like all beat up, like the cover's all creased, and I think there's some water stains on it and stuff, because I got that at the time and I carried it with me everywhere, brought it to school and all of that at the time. So that's when I really remember really getting into it and getting the books. But I definitely went to things before that. My mother tells me that the first time she brought me to the MFA when I was maybe 4 or 5, that I already was attracted to the Egyptian material at that point. So I guess that's what started it. I wanted to, certainly when I remember the Ramses exhibit, I wanted to be an Egyptologist at that point. I did kind of like move around and think about doing other careers and so forth. It took me a little time to actually finally decide on doing that, but then I did in the end. Jihad also mentions that you're taking the course Ancient Egypt and its Civilization at UPenn with David Silverman. Yeah, I haven't seen the online course, but I can imagine exactly what's in there, because David Silverman was actually my dissertation committee chair, because I went to Penn. So I'm sure it's a good course. And the book that he edited that's on a similar topic, I think that's suggested for that course. That's a good one. It's a good intro text to use for intro classes. So I'm sure that's good. I've heard of other people taking it online too and who enjoyed it. CRD says, if I decide to accept more students for tutoring, to let us know. Yeah, like I said, I would recommend getting on my email list, because anytime I open up the doors for anything, that's where I announce it first, before social or anywhere else. So again, you can go to voicesofancientegypt.com/guide and sign up there. And Carlos said he agrees, so I guess you mean on that same thing. Dakota, your dad lives and works in Cairo. Cool. Let's see. You're welcome, Malcolm. Celtic Tiger. Yeah, I think you probably mean the star hieroglyph. It does look kind of like a starfish, but I believe it's just a star. And Randall's back. Hi. And is Gardner's Middle Egyptian grammar still a good text? Kathy asks. Gardner's pretty outdated. People still use it as a reference, and I certainly have it myself. It's kind of a behemoth. But I'll be honest, I don't use it really that often. It's here, but I don't teach from it. It's his understanding of verbs is very kind of outdated and stuff. So it's good to have around as a reference, but it's not the best to learn from, I would say. So, yeah, and some people do, as CRD says, some people are still using Gardner, so you can, but if you teach from Gardner, you need a lot of supplemental materials because things have changed so much. And as CRD pointed out, you can also get James Allen's grammar, which is in its 3rd edition now. I actually learned from Allen's 1st edition originally. I found it not the easiest to learn from in the beginning. Which is why I don't recommend it as a beginner text. I think that's something to tackle a little later, unless you're going into a PhD program, in which case you're going to learn from whatever book your professor is using. But James Hoch also has a grammar that's one that's often used at universities. I think in University of Chicago they use that one still, and that's a good one for that too. But again, it's going to be a little bit higher level on the grammar and so forth. So. Let's see. Thank you, Renee. All right. CRD, you mentioned James Hoch's grammar already, too. I didn't see that before. All right. Let's see. Andrew wants to know what a PhD Egyptology PhD dissertation looks like. It looks like a big book with a lot of technical terminology in it. I would say that's what it looks like. I mean, mine's only like 300 pages or something like that. And I say only because that's actually pretty small in Egyptology, I would say. Compared to some other fields, that can be pretty big. But I mean, a lot of my friends who were in grad school with me had like 1,000-page dissertations and stuff like that. So they're pretty detailed. Basically, a very detailed study of one specific sort of question or problem in the field. So mine is specifically on, and I'll get to you in just a second, Dakota. I know you're reminding me about the phonetic complements. My dissertation specifically on basically how people in the Middle Kingdom who had administrative titles or jobs, you could say, how they got those positions. And, was it a matter of inheriting your position, which is often stated very briefly in books? Or was it more complicated than that? Do you have other factors? Is merit involved, for example? Is it more a factor of nepotism rather than necessarily inheritance? Skills, training, etc. So, that's the topic mine's on, and a very specific time period. So, just to give you an idea, that's what they're about. If you happen to be at a university and you can access dissertations, you can find it actually because it's on the ProQuest dissertation server that pretty much every university I think has full access to. So. Yeah, you guys are talking about Faulkner. It's a good dictionary when you get used to the handwriting. It's true. Somebody actually has a typeset version of Faulkner online. So if you search for Faulkner's dictionary online, you can find it. To be honest, I don't know if it's legal, but I just know it's out there. But somebody typeset it with JSesh. So I personally like the original because I'm used to the handwriting. Carlos says what he likes about Allen is you can see his passion for the subject. That's definitely for sure. Jim Allen, I don't know how to describe him except for like the most uber committed Egyptologist. I'm amazed at how much he puts out these days and so forth too, as well. He's still a full professor and teaching all the time and everything. Andrew, yeah, it's a can of worms, yes. Okay, so Dakota wanted me to talk a little bit about phonetic complements. It's something I haven't really addressed in my videos yet, but it is an important thing when you're first starting out with hieroglyphs. So I can use JSesh here to give us another example. Hopefully it's since I made it bigger, it's large enough to see stuff. So let me think, what would be a word we could do? We could do like sejum, for example, which is done with this cow's ear. This cow ear is the, sorry, I got distracted by something in the chat. The cow's ear is a sign that stands for the sounds of like S, second D, which is a J, and M. So we say sejum in modern times. But if you're going to use this as, it's the verb to hear, if you're going to use it for the verb to hear, it's also spelled with an additional M after it, this owl, which is an M. So this is what we call a phonetic complement. And the idea is that oftentimes when you have a sign that has 2 or 3 sounds in it, so like sejum has 3 sounds, then oftentimes they will repeat the last sound, or sometimes the last 2 sounds, sometimes all of them actually, at the end. And why they did this exactly, we don't know for sure, but it seems like it's probably meant to be a helper thing, because there are so many hieroglyphic signs, like sejum, that have multiple sounds in them. And there's just so many to learn. Also, sometimes some signs, like, I think this will bring it up, yes. So this sign here, which I've typed in, I type in a capital A and a B to get it, because this is, can be ab, like aleph, B, excuse me, in Egyptian, but it can also be mer, that is MR. It can be either one. So in this case, phonetic complements really help extra, because is this ab or mer? Just from looking at it, you can't tell. Now, if it's in a larger word and there's greater context, you might be able to tell from that, but also a phonetic complement is going to help you here. So if you had this and then it's followed by an R, it probably wouldn't be positioned quite like that, but you get my point. If it's followed by an R, then that's going to tell you that's mer instead of ab. So that's one of the main reasons it seems like that they have the phonetic complements. So I don't know, Dakota, did that answer your question fully, or did you have other things that you wanted to know about in terms of phonetic complements? Let me know. I'm not sure if trying to think if there's anything else to say about them other than that. But the basic idea is that you have this sort of repetition of sounds. So it's something that you get Sometimes they do it, sometimes they don't. And I would say that's, Dakota wants to know, how do we know that we don't actually pronounce it? So if it's a phonetic complement, like in this case, the R with mare, we don't pronounce the extra sign. It's just helping to give you a clue about that previous hieroglyph. So my students often say that when they first start out, the phonetic complements drive them crazy because they don't know when they should be transliterating them when they're writing out a text, for example, and when they should not do that because it's actually just a phonetic complement. But once they get used to it, then they actually find they actually are helpful for figuring out what a word is or what this previous sign sounds are, and so forth. So how do we know that, Dakota? Just because if it's an R that follows mare, most likely it's going to be that. Now you might have on rare, in certain, not super rare, but somewhat rare occurrences, you could have something where it's trying to actually indicate a doubling of the sound in certain verb forms, for example. But usually if you only have one of them following, that's not the case. So if they wanted to double it up, they'd be more likely to actually put two of those R's after, for example, if we were talking about this sign in particular. And that would let you know that the first one's a phonetic complement and the second one is actually an additional R. She wants to know how, I think Dakota's a she. I don't know. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But who figured out that these are not pronounced? That's a good question. I'm not sure who figured it out. But I believe that it was probably figured out the way that so much other vocabulary in Egyptian and signs and so forth were figured out, which is initially mostly by cross-referencing with Coptic, which is a later stage of Egyptian written with the Greek alphabet. So a lot of times that's part of how we got to know some of the grammar. It does change over time, but that's part of how we got to know some of the sounds in the grammar. And sorry, when I look at the chat, then it totally throws me off. I need to stop looking while I'm trying to explain something. So there's those ways. Sometimes we also have names that are written in some cuneiform texts, and cuneiform is syllabic, has all the sounds in it and things like that. So by comparing those, that's one of the ways that we've figured out basically what the sounds are, as well as a fair amount of the vocabulary as well. Dakota, yeah, I know it seems strange. It's very different from when you use an alphabetic script or something like that. So it is a very different practice. So Dawn wanted to know if I use Greek names for African deities, so meaning like Egyptian deities. I usually use whatever terms are the ones that people recognize the most. So that depends on the deity. A lot of Egyptian deities are commonly referred to by Greek terms. And Will asked me what the fastest land animal on Earth. Well, it's the cheetah, of course, but that's totally irrelevant. So anyway, back to Dawn's question. There are a lot of Egyptian gods for which we use the Greek versions of their names. And that is because for a long time, people couldn't read Egyptian. And so they didn't know what the original names were. They only knew what the Greek versions were that had come down through Greek texts because Greek was never lost. And whereas Egyptian, the last time hieroglyphs were used were in the late 4th century, and they weren't figured out again until the early 19th century. So for a long time, just nobody knew other than from reading Greek authors talking about Egypt. So this is why they've stuck. I agree it's not the best thing, but we also do that with place names in Egypt. Some of them are in Arabic. Some of them are in Greek. Some of them are in the original sort of Egyptian, the way we pronounce it today. So you have this huge mix. It's really actually kind of difficult for beginners when they're learning in Egyptology because the place names and the names of figures and stuff are so jumbled that like some are in Greek and some are in Egyptian, some are in modern Arabic. And so it can be really hard to get to know all these names and so forth. So yeah, so like if I'm talking about the Egyptian god that most people call Anubis, I usually call him Anubis. But I know in Egyptian, obviously, the way we would pronounce the Egyptian in modern times would be Impu. Again, that's not necessarily how the Egyptians would have pronounced it, though. That's our modern convenience way of pronouncing it. So it's also not totally accurate. So, I mean, that's just what I do. But there are some gods, for example, that were not as popularly talked about in a Greek text. And so we do usually use more of the Egyptianized versions of their names. So trying to think of who's a good version, good example of that. I mean, like the god Sokar, for example. It's his name is spelled, SKR or SQR in Egyptian. Sokar, basically same. Sobek, same kind of thing too. It's just a matter of whether you want to use an O vowel or an E vowel, which none of which we know what it was originally in Egyptian anyway. So hopefully that answered your question, Don. Let's see. Muhammad wanted to know more about the Book of the Dead. As I talked about it, what would be a good translation and transliteration? It's a good question, Muhammad. For translation, there is a book that I think I have handy, maybe. Not sure where I put it right now. Because I can't remember the exact title and author. Is it this one? Yeah, Faulkner. It's a little bit old. Faulkner stuff is not the newest, but Faulkner has a pretty good translation of most of the, I think most, if not all, of the potential chapters for the Book of the Dead. It's just called the Book of the Dead, I think, or the Ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead. So I think there's a newer edition of this too, since the one I have. But as far as one with the transliteration, I'd have to look into that to be able to answer that better. Let's see. So Dakota's asking about the feathers on Osiris's headdress on his crown, and whether it's symbolized fairness. So I guess you're saying that some people are talking about him being like the feathers of Ma'at. I don't think the feathers on his crown are the same feathers as Ma'at, actually. So I'm not sure 100% what the point is of the feathers on the crown. I'm not sure if anybody's worked on that, but I don't believe they're the same feathers as the Ma'at ones. Let's see. Carlos wanted to know how I'm typing the hieroglyphs. Yeah, I mentioned earlier, this is a program called JSesh. That's a free open source software. Easy to download and takes a little getting used to for how to type the stuff and so forth, but I put it in the chat. And I think CRD already answered that too. Let's see. See, a bunch of people are sort of talking about the Greek names and that kind of stuff. Malcolm wants to know, how do you pronounce Amun-Re? I would say Amun-Re, Anubis, Bast or Bastet. Khepere, I think is Kheper, you mean? Kheper? Hathor, Harishef, Horus, Isis, Osiris, Thoth, Sphinx of Giza, pyramids, and Egyptian hieroglyphs. See, all of those, that would be, so Amun is spelled basically just like Imun, but it probably was something kind of similar to Amun. Anubis is more like Inbu. Bast is basically Bast. Kheper is Kheper. Hathor is Huther. Harishef is Harishef. Horus is usually just Hor, or Horu. Isis is Isset. Osiris, Asir. Ptah is Ptah. Thoth is Jehudi. Probably because the J was actually more of a J kind of sound, not really a J. So that's part of why it ends up as a Th in Greek. I don't know what the word is for Sphinx. And there was no word for Giza, and there were just the names of the pyramids and stuff like that. So don't know about those ones. The word for pyramid in Egyptian, I think, is Mer, if I recall correctly. There might be more than one. And I think it's actually spelled with the sign I was just showing you, and a pyramid determinative. So, hi Mahmoud. I'm not sure which creature this three-headed snake is, Dakota, that you're talking about. Depending on which tomb it's in, it could be some of the later underworld books in the King's Tombs and the Valley of Kings, and I have to say those are not really my thing. My colleague Josh Roberson would probably be a good person to ask about that. And actually, now I'm blanking on who it was who was in Memphis. Is it CRD? I can't remember. You would know him since that's where he is. He's written a lot on the books of the earth and things like that. But that's one I'm not super familiar with. And that's yeah. And I said some of the drawings and tombs are crazy, and that they're probably from those later underworld books. They are kind of crazy looking. Sakina, I'm not sure what you mean by the moon and Yusuf. Oh, I see. I guess you mean like the biblical figure Joseph. Is that what you're talking about? And I'm not sure what the connection with the moon would be. I actually need to wrap it up because I was planning to only do this for like 20 or 30 minutes, and it's been an hour. So you guys got me going. I didn't quite expect like so many questions and to get off on so many topics. So this is going on. Yeah, CRD. That's yeah. I love Josh. He's great. We went to Penn together. So and he's brilliant. He knows all about that topic. So he would know that way better than I do. Let's see. So yeah, I do know him. Yeah, Josh. He finished a few years before me, and started a little before me, but we were there basically the same time. So, all right. Yeah. So I'm going to wrap it up, guys, but thank you very much for coming. This was a lot of fun. Took a little longer than I expected. I have to go do something else actually right away. I have to record some audios for my next videos, for example, because I haven't gotten a chance to do that with the power outage, etc. But thank you all for coming. It's been great. I'll definitely do this again in the future. I'm just not sure of the exact schedule yet. So I will see you all again soon. Take care. Bye.